Now in the third session of the International Conference on Global Movements of the Moderates, and I'd like to invite all the four speakers and our moderator for the third session to be on stage. Please help me in welcoming the speakers and moderator for the third session. We give all the speakers and our moderator a warm welcome, a big round of applause. And we'll still try to abide by the time allocated, and it's 1 hour and 15 minutes. So just to be sure, we have provided, if you notice, an extra terminal right on the stage over here, so that all the speakers will be notified on the time limits that they have. And to moderate the session, we have with us Datuk Dr. Nik Nozrul Thani, who is now the chairman of the Zaid Ibrahim and Company, the largest law firm in Malaysia. He is also another shining example of IUM alumnus, a thoroughbred of IUM product. I hand over the session to Datuk Dr. Nik Nozrul Thani.
Thank you, Mr. Zaid. Good evening, good afternoon, all of you. And I'm sure you all would like to get the session started. So I've got the permission from the speakers to basically, you can see their profile within the booklet itself. So they're well introduced in a sense. And today's session, I hope that the fact that we're talking about money, people stay awake. It's very hard to stay awake after a session of good lunch like just now. And I'll basically start the ball rolling by getting Mr. Ian H., who's right now the director of Centre for Islamic Middle Eastern Studies, Middle Eastern Law at School of Rental African Studies in London. You can start the session.
Good afternoon. Excellencies, learned colleagues, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I was extremely honoured to receive the invitation from the Prime Minister's office to speak at this important conference. And I'm called upon today to introduce to you the topic social justice, the balance between greed and profit. And for that purpose, I put aside for the moment my hat as a Middle Eastern expert and talk mainly as an international commercial lawyer. Let me first read you a quote from my favourite English author, Charles Dickens. It's the opening lines to his novel, A Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of dark. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven. We were all going direct to the other place. Well, Dickens was referring to revolutionary France in the 18th century, which was the time when the novel was set. But it had a resonance for his readers in Victorian England at what was the beginnings of modern capitalism. And as all the best novels are effectively timeless, I think it also resonates today, 150 years after it was written, as a vivid description of modern times. It says to us that the problems of today are also those of yesterday. It's just that they got a lot bigger. And it also says that in any age there are manifold contradictions. Not everything, even in the midst of crises, is bad. Hence the need for moderation, for the choosing between what is good and what is bad, and the main theme of this important conference. But to move forward, we need to change the present system. And this conference is aimed at producing at least a blueprint for change, a signpost of what needs to be done to move forward. But change can only be successful if it builds on a knowledge and understanding of the past and the why things went wrong. 2011 was a watershed year in many ways, a critical turning point. The Prime Minister of Malaysia this morning, in his excellent introductory speech, highlighted the global financial crisis. He called it evidence of extremism, without, he said in a very memorable phrase, a single bullet being fired. And certainly the world economy stalled in 2011. The facts are really quite dramatic. 12% reduction in global stock markets amounting to about $6 trillion, sovereign debt threatening the Eurozone, the spectre of worldwide downturn and mass unemployment. No wonder the Financial Times last week had a series entitled Capitalism in Crisis. And at the bottom of it all, there is a belief that mainstream political and economic institutions are bankrupt of ideas and full of corruption, that there has been in the last few decades a creation of social injustice through greed and the increasing inequality of wealth. The FT tells us that the top fifth of the world's population enjoy 75% of its financial resources, the bottom fifth less than 2%. A global super elite has been fueled by the financial industry. The greedy rich have gobbled up a disproportionate amount of the financial capital of the world. I was looking for an example of this, and The Economist gave me one this week. It was talking about the residence of India's richest man, Mukesh Ambani, in Mumbai, that he's called Antilla. It's the most expensive residence in the world. It has 27 floors, 3 helipads, 9 lifts, and needs 600 servants. And it has something which I don't quite understand, called a vertical garden. The Prime Minister of India recently referred to it in less than glowing terms and compared it unfavourably to the appalling statistic that India has the most malnourished children of any country in the world. But 2011 was also important for various political upheavals, particularly those in the Middle East, the Arab Spring. Mohammed Bouazizi, a poor vegetable seller, ignored and downtrodden by the bureaucracy in Tunisia, burnt himself to death in protest at the corrupt system. An ultimate act of control against a corrupt and unlistening regime. An act of despair, but also courage. And it led indirectly to the collapse of several repressive and corrupt regimes in Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, with possibly more to come. And perhaps it's not surprising that the political upheavals in the Middle East were led by the youth of the Middle East. 2/3 of the population of Egypt is under the age of 30. And the youth of today need to be considered in anything that we plan in this conference. They are an important demographic feature. Another important milestone in 2011, and a rather worrying one, was that there was the birth somewhere on the planet of the 7th billionth human being. In 20 years' time, there may be another billion. In 50 years' time, there may be 10 billion. These demographics make change imperative because the consequences, particularly for the natural resources of the planet, are horrifying. Professor Berger this morning said that moderation was dull. I don't think so, but it may seem so for the youth of today, who are impetuous for change and idealistic. Therefore, any suggestions for change must encompass the youth of today, not just greybeards like myself. They should have a voice. And my first suggestion for the conference is that perhaps there should be a youth section of the GMM, perhaps even a follow-up conference for all those who are under the age of 30. But it's easy to state the problem created by the global financial crisis. It's less easy to seek a solution. Why have things gone wrong economically? Why is capitalism in crisis? The years since the war have been ones where the population of the world has been seduced by materialism. I consume, therefore I am, has become the watchword. This is seen by some as due to a demise of religion, a loss of moral responsibility. But it's not clear whether this is a cause or a symptom. Where did we get today? Well, in the 1980s and 1990s, there was a belief that the markets left to themselves would control and discipline themselves, and that what was good for the market would be good for the global economy. So in the 1980s and 90s, deregulation of the financial industry particularly took place under Reagan and Thatcher, exemplified best perhaps by Michael Douglas playing the part of a ruthless New York trader in the 1987 film Wall Street as Gordon Gekko. Mark my words, he said, greed will not only save this company, but will save the United States of America. Greed is good was the watchword of the 1980s and 1990s. But it manifestly, what's happened since has manifestly shown that those principles were false, and that a complete reliance on the markets only increases instability and injustice. The banks changed from the unglamorous business of savings and loans to trading in complex financial instruments that very few people understood, and the result was increasing risk and instability. So what is the way forward? What would be the moderate way? And I suggest that at the end of the conference there ought to be some form of statement or principles about how the conference sees the way forward. I suggest 6 ways. The first is there should be better financial regulation, particularly of the banks. More capital is required, the holding of less risky assets. This is already being done, but I think it would be important for the conference to say that they supported this. The second is better rules on corporate governance. There is a division of ownership and control these days that needs to be rethought, a need for more say by shareholders and employees. Particularly, executive pay needs to be related to long-term goals rather than short-term ones. Thirdly, there needs to be a reform of the taxation system. Taxation systems need to be fairer so that there are less loopholes for the rich to escape, to ensure that they are not being enriched at the expense of the middle-class taxpayer. Fourth, there needs to be a commitment to fight corruption. Again, this is already being done on a global scale, but needs the support of conference. And there are innovative solutions in relation to corruption that I'm minded of. I read recently of a scheme in India whereby India has become the largest, or created the largest biometric database of any country, including 200 million people in a unique identity scheme, which is pinpointed at the poor, because once you have identified the poor, you can then pinpoint aid and benefits directly to them. The fifth is that there needs to be a promotion of employment, particularly amongst the young. Here, I'm thinking perhaps of job sharing, where those who are at the end of their career could job share with those at the beginning. And finally, there needs to be an expectation of philanthropy, the promotion of philanthropy upon those who have made most out of society. The Victorians knew that their entrepreneurs had to put something back. You can't legislate for the rich to have a heart. What's needed is a change in social attitudes, a change in expectations amongst the rich. To round up, let me again go back to the 18th century, to a political philosopher, this time Edmund Burke. Society is a partnership between not only of those living today, but also those yet to be born. Our generation will be judged by our children and our grandchildren on how we react to the present crisis. Let us strive boldly to produce an innovative, just plan for the future based upon the ideals of moderation. And the GMM movement, I hope, will provide just that.
Thank you, Ian. Ian has given us quite a brief setting on the topic. As you say, the topic today is social justice, balance between profits and greed. I'm aware of the time constraints, so I'll get quickly, we've got 4 speakers to go through today. Professor Dr. Muhammad Azmi Omar to continue with his presentation. This is his last session as a IIU Don, as he was going to Jeddah soon, Dr. Azmi.
Where's the control for the movement? Fellow panelists, Your Excellencies, delegates, Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and good afternoon. This is a very important topic in the context that here we are talking about balancing between greed and profit. And we say that is social justice. Being an economist, to me, before I try to give my thoughts on this, then what I would like to do is, within the time period, to share with you a little bit about the crisis, as being mentioned by Ian just now, about the crisis. If you look at the global financial crisis, there are many reasons to the causes of the crisis. I will not dwell too much into the details of the crisis, but let me just give a few perspectives about the crisis. And then subsequently, I will also comment in the context of Islamic financial ethics, and subsequently maybe propose some solution. Okay? I think if you look at the crisis globally, we have 7 major crises in 20 years. Larry Summers says that it's just too much to have crisis. We used to say crisis occurred every 5 years. Now it's almost like every 3 years a crisis occurs. And even now we are in the midst of crisis, particularly in Europe. And if you look at the country, in the countries that are facing crisis, you have so many countries that have experienced crisis. From the 80s, from Latin America, for example, the Tequila crisis in Mexico, the Asian financial crisis, the Russian rubble crisis, Argentina, and so on. And now we see the Eurozone crisis. Part of the crisis, if you look at one of them, is the issue of subprime crisis. We talk about lending to the poor, and those poor are not able to pay the loan because simply they are poor, and they're given loan much more than what they have. So as a result, they are unable to pay, and that leads to one of the major problems in the American context. So it happened in 2007, where you have the bubble burst. If you look in this particular context, if you look from Sharia point of view, Islamic point of view, it is the responsibility of the government to provide housing to the poor. Whereas in the context of American system, it is the private sector that provides housing to the poor. And as a result, because the poor were not able to pay, it creates housing bubble. And then when there was a collapse of the housing bubble, bank before that securitized, which I'm going to talk next, that creates another set of problems. So one of the issues that we need to look at that is that under Islam, we have the term called riba, whereby we say that riba is interest-based. And one of the key components of riba is the issue of justice. In riba, it is not just. And Islam says that in any transaction, justice must occur in any transaction. So this is one of the key things that we need to look at. So the question of justice. And this is the question that we are asking today as well. Secondly, again, I will skip some of the things. Subsequent to the issue of subprime loans is the issue of securitization of subprime mortgages, where banks created securities out of housing loans or mortgage loans from the poor borrowers. The issue of securitization per se is not a problem, because even under Islam, we have a term called suku, where we securitize certain tangible assets and create Islamic instruments called suku or Islamic bonds to be traded in the market. So the issue of securitization per se is not a problem. But what the problem occurred in this particular case is where you have the next level of securitization, whereby the issue of instruments that are being, the instruments that are being issued in the market are then subsequently repackaged and reissued into a new set of instruments. So what we see in this particular case is the issue of speculation that comes into the market, the issue of gharar or highly speculative activities that comes into the market. That leads to another issue in Islamic finance, what we call the issue of speculative, heavy, excessive speculation, a term called gharar. So just now we have the term called riba, which is an equivalent to interest, which is not allowed under Islamic principles, and we have the second component that we can see, the component of gharar or excessive speculation that happens in the financial market. So we have two important elements, the element of riba, the element of gharar that comes into the market. Okay, so that is the second component. The third component is where we have, again, I'm mindful of the time, whereby you have another instrument that was created in order to support the securitization of instruments. And this instrument is called credit default swap. Again, credit default swap is akin to the element of gharar. It is a zero-sum game. One party wins, the other party will not win. And under Islamic principle, this is akin to gambling, similar to gharar, therefore it is also not acceptable. Okay? And more importantly, which I want to go to relate to what Ian mentioned just now, is the issue of moral failure of banks and its professionals. And this is the third component. So I talked about riba just now, I talked about gharar, and the third one is about the ethical principles of individuals in financial institutions. As you can see from here, banks are interested to generate as much loan as possible. Why? Because their compensation are tied to the issue of providing more loans. Secondly, in order to generate more income, the securitization of loans are being made. More and more securities are being offered in the market, arising from those loans, and banks are, again, compensated from the issuing of more securities. So as a result, the focus from fund-based activities into what we call fee-based activities. Banks' income used to be the difference between financing provided and deposits received. That's called fund-based activities. Later on, it moved to fee-based activities, advising creating more securities and earn income from those securities. So as a result, what has happened is that we have a skewed remuneration system. Profits, bonuses, salaries are paid on the basis of how much securities you created. So as a result, we have a lax regulation, not only from the central bank, also within the banking system itself. So you have a lot of bonuses, you have salaries being paid. Subsequently, when the banks fail, what you can see is a very interesting phenomena, which I call head I win, tail you lose. If you flip a coin, as we normally say, head I win, tail I lose, right? But in the context of banking, which is interesting, is when you flip a coin, head I win, tail you lose, not win. So what we call in banking, profits, you privatize profits, losses, you socialize losses. So when banks make profit, they get all the bonuses, the profits being retained. When there is huge losses, who bears the losses? Government has to nationalize those banks, so it's the public that bears the losses. So this is an issue. Why this issue happened is simply because of the issue of what we call, the issue of greed. That comes to another factor. Greed is a very big aspect in banking. Because of that greed by bankers, the whole system collapsed. So you have riba-based, you have speculative activities, coupled with the greed element, that goes and makes banks going into the extremes. And what we say today, at the end of the day, is that what we want is, again, the financial architecture, the financial system, the banking system must be moderate. Okay? Must be moderate. Hence, I will not go into this issue of capitalism, but what I'm saying is, in these particular aspects, as being mentioned earlier on by also the president of the IDB, we talk about 3 pillars of economic development. We talk about equity risk sharing. Islamic principles talk about equity risk sharing. We talk about ethics, social responsibility. Banks must implement ethics and social responsibility. But the question is, how do we moderate those how do we moderate those profits that are being driven by the banks? I think, to me, one of the key solutions to do this is the issue of what we call objective of Sharia, the maqasid of Sharia. So my proposal is that using maqasid of Sharia, the objective of Sharia, as a basis to moderate profits in financial transactions. In this way, we will be able to moderate between greed and excessive profit. How do we do that? Even given the time constraint, I will not be able to spend too much time, but I hope my colleague will also talk a bit about the maqasid al-Sharia. And this is very important because to us, maqasid al-Sharia means the promotion of justice, al-dil wal-ihsan, promotion of justice and benevolence in financial marketplace. And this is what we want in the current society. We don't want to have excessive, both sides of extremes, excessive profit that will kill the society. So we need to have a balance, and that balance is what we call on the basis of justice, maqasid al-Sharia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Dr. Azmi, my good friend. Well, I mean, I'm happy to note that the speakers are very moderate in their timing as well. I think time is money for these people. They're all businessmen and bankers. And our third speaker came all the way from the land of the rising sun, from Japan, Mr. Yoshiro Watanabe. He's a banker, basically, from a banker perspective, and we'll hear what he says then.
This is distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm very privileged to be here to speak to you. As a practical banker's background, I wish to touch on Japan's case, especially bubble burst and great Japan earthquake of last year. But before then, I'd like to see. Sorry. Seems not on slide. The slide? Can slide? The slide is. Maybe all right. I'd like to touch on the Japan's case, but before then, I'd like to touch on last 2 decades, which were crises one after another. And the other years, what globalization has brought us, the human mobility of goods, money, services, and information. And I'd like to touch on profit maximization and excesses. As you can recall, the last 2 decades, there are so many crises and changes. Soviet Union collapse and birth of CIS was one of the factors promoting new globalization. The communist country and included into global arena. U.S. after victory of Cold War became only one superpower, promoting market economy, neoliberalism, and democracy. The series of financial crises are brought by free but uncontrolled capital flow and and unfortunately, terrorist attack was brought by enlarged human mobility. People's greed brought Lehman shock under lenient supervision and governance. The shockwave spread globally in the globalized economy. Today's crisis is easy to spread to other end of the world. There are so many advantages brought by new globalization, such as increased human mobility, freer trade of goods and service, freer capital flow, and information flow. Those made market expanded and brought economic growth. Those changes are brought by technological innovation and regulatory ideological changes. The communist gave up ideology. The prosperity of economy was achieved, but social imbalance increased. The pursuit of growth needs natural resources, energy, and food. Those securities are now in danger. This century is expected as Asian century, but there are a lot of challenges we face. Without regional collaboration, the simple pursuit of each country's interest may risk regional security. In today's market-oriented economy, people are encouraged to pursue profit. If successful, the profit can become enormous in the globalized economy. The winner can take it all. It is easy to maximize profit. Maximization of profit moved by greed cannot be sustainable at all. It was and it can be a cause of a crisis. The Japanese banking law, Article 1, stipulates that the banks should be managed soundly and appropriately for the public benefits to contribute a sound development of national economy. Thus, banks are in Japan categorized as public purpose institution or public utility in spite of private ownership. In the banking supervision fields, the only stronger regulation or increase of capital may kill the economy when it is not in right timing. So macro prudence and oversight are the most important issues. Japanese post-war growth was once called miracle that largely depended on the security surrounding Japan. Post-World War II, Japan herself took pacifist policy, avoiding serious international conflict. The growth under peace accumulated national wealth of Japan, and we realized advanced society led by majority of middle-class people. We could focus our resources to economic growth, not for conflict. After middle-class society led by many people achieved Japan's very moderate society. But we, the people and corporate in Japan, in 1980s invested our wealth to the domestic real estate, which leveraged by finance, by banks. That brought unsustainable bubble. It took more than a decade for the financial institutions to dispose bubble-related bad assets. The cause of bubble is from people's greed. Of course, middle-class people is very moderate, but they need to hedge to invest in view of increasing real estate price. The lack of governance and loose fiscal monetary policy brought it up. It was horrible last year for Japan due to March 11, the great earthquake of East Japan and devastating tsunami. But we also found again the value of the community of Japan. The people behaved and helped each other. The supply chain of manufacturers, connectivity were cut and disrupted in many points. Then the competing companies helped competitor hit by earthquake without any compensation. We also received many helps and assistance from abroad, of course from Malaysia. Globalization made people nearer for mutual assistance. I think Japan's consumerism or individualism went too far, but we found the family and community value again. My conclusion is to return back the basics principle of economics and to restructure economic ethics. The economics is to increase welfare of people in balanced, flexible, and stable national economy. In Japan, there were many pre-modern economists in the 17th to 19th centuries. They made backbones of people in industries, commerce, agriculture, and even ruling class samurai, lecturing importance of value of 5 major values I pointed out here. First one is diligence, and second is savings, and third one, bringing up human resources, and practical mindedness, and awareness in limitation of market. Those 5 things are pointed out by pre-modern Japanese scholars. And we Japanese put into our, say, a kind of instinct about diligence. We need to be diligent because of school, primary school. We have a statute of a very diligent economist. And also, we need to say, pursue savings. Even the days of world wars, more than 30 years, Japan kept a current account surplus. We accumulated nearly $3 trillion of external asset. And there is one very interesting anecdote that when Japanese old ladies of 100 years old, twins, called Miss Silver and Miss Gold, they appeared on TV, and then they are compensated by TV casters. And TV caster asked, how do you spend the compensation? They said, we will deposit for the sake of after get old. So that's kind of, I think, a very maybe common value shared in Japan. And I'd like to thank you again very much for your kind support for Japan's recovery now going on. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Mr. Yoshihiro Watanabe. And I now come to the last speaker, Professor Dr. Ahmad Agundus.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. My paper is, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank for organizers for this very important conference. My paper is about the zakat and waqf are as bridges between profits and greed. As you know, it is stated by a sound hadith. As-zakat qantaratul Islam. Zakat is the bridge of Islam. Yes, there is vast wisdom in the obligation of zakat and prohibition of interest and lofty benefits and extensive mercy. Islamic law has established zakat and waqf as bridges between profits and greed. I could say Islam summarizes the root cause of the great social upheavals that have been suffered, particularly in this century, in two phrases. First one is, so long as I am full, what is it to me if others die of hunger? Second one is, you struggle and labor so that I can live in ease and comfort. Islam demonstrates that if hunger and poverty are to be eradicated, it will be through applying the Quranic injunction of almsgiving, social assistance, and mutual help. We could summarize as waqf and zakah. Aqimus salah wa atu zakah, being steadfast in performing prayers, giving zakat. And the prohibition against earning without working. That means interest. And God said, أَحَلَّ اللَّهُ الْبَيْعَ وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَى. God has permitted trade and forbidden interest. That is first. Ladies and gentlemen, the most important factor in maintaining the order of society as a whole is not to allow an unbridgeable gulf to develop between the various classes between human beings, among human beings. The upper classes, we could say rich class or etc., and the rich should not become so far removed from the lower classes, and the poor that the lines of communication are broken, as happened in capitalist civilizations. Despite all its societies for good works and its establishments for teaching of ethics, all its civil discipline and regulations, unfortunately, capitalism could neither reconcile those two classes nor heal the two wounds in human life caused by the two phrases above. That is reality. And let me narrate very important hadith for our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Al-harisu khaibun khasir. Greedy is deceived and lost. Really, greed has serious consequences according to Islamic principles. The first is dissatisfaction. As for dissatisfaction, it destroys endeavor and enthusiasm for work and causes the dissatisfied person to complain instead of giving thanks and makes him lazy, unfortunately. Second consequence of greed is disappointment and loss. The greedy person drives away what he wishes for, is found disagreeable, and is deprived of assistance and help. Consumers increase and producers decrease as a result of wastefulness and lack of economy. Everyone fixes his eyes on the government's door, like in most of Muslim countries. Then industry, trade, and agriculture on which social life depends decrease, and the nation declines and is impoverished. According to the hadith, contentment is an unfailing treasure. Al-qana'atu kanzun la yafna. Contentment is a treasury of good living and ease of life. And third consequence, greed destroys sincerity and damages actions in regard to the hereafter. For if a God-fearing person suffers from greed, he will desire the regard of others. And someone who considers the regard of others cannot have complete sincerity. According to the hadith, the contented person is respected, and the greedy person despised. And ladies and gentlemen, I would like to mention some restrictions and limitations for rate of profit in Islam. As you know, first of all, bay'ul ina, that is the basic contract about murabaha and etc. Islam has restricted the rate of profit in this muamala. Let me narrate you an article from Ottoman Legal Code. It is not allowed for muamala shari'iyya if the rate of benefit does not exceed 10%, and it must not be allowed for the sake of interest via muamala shari'iyya. Secondly, murabaha is like that. And thirdly, musawama is the negotiation of a selling price between two parties without reference by the seller to either cost or asking price. Some scholars from Islamic law have restricted the rate of profit. Some of them didn't agree with that. And let me mention some basic conflicts between good business practice and profit making in Islam. First of all, in Islamic law, there are three very important principles. First, trust. Trust of God's creation and all that is in it. Secondly, justice and honesty. Let me recite or read the meaning of the Quran. O you who believe, stand out firmly for justice and witnesses to Allah, even as against yourselves, or your parents, or your kin, and whether it be against rich or poor, for Allah can best protect both. Follow not the lust of your hearts, lest you sever, and if you distort justice, or decline to do justice, verily Allah is well acquainted with all that you do. And last one, mutual respect. This is very important too, but the time is unfortunately ending. For this reason, let me say some things as a principles. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to summarize to you three very important things, principles. First of all, I have understood from Islamic rules that there is no race, no religion, no color for three things. First, the right, haqq. The right is the right. Small or big, Muslim or non-Muslim. Secondly, proficiency, al-mahara. And thirdly, knowledge, al-ilm. This is first. Secondly, everybody, most of speakers have mentioned from about moderate way, middle path, etc. I would like to remind you that a Muslim, especially a pious Muslim, is repeating dua, prayers, Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim. O our God, guide us to sirat al-mustaqim. Sirat al-mustaqim, that is middle way, right way, and moderate way. And last sentence for me, maybe too long, we should all adopt the following overriding principles from Islam about justice, balance, etc. First of all, be honest and truthful. I have collected from verses of the Quran and Hadith. Keep your word. Awfu bil uqud. Love God more than your trade and business. Deal with non-Muslims as dealing with Muslims. Be humble in how you conduct your life. Use mutual consultation in your affairs. Do not deal with interest transactions. Do not deal in fraud. Do not bribe. Deal justly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Ahmad Agundis. Ladies and gentlemen, our session right now is regarding social justice, balance between profits and greed. And I think the four panelists, distinguished panelists, have given their perspective. Mr. Ian H. on global setting, generally on recent events. Professor Dr. Azmi Omar on Islamic finance perspective or attainment of social justice. Mr. Yoshiro Watanabe on the Japanese approach on what we had, crisis and the moderation there too. And lastly, Professor Ahmad Agundis on the issue of wakaf and zakat as a means of attaining social justice and balancing between profits and greed. Now we're open for, our timing is quite good. I think we've been quite decent in timing. I mean, can I have questions for the floor? Yes, please. Yeah. Can somebody provide the microphone? Yes.
My name is Marina Mahathir. I'm from Sisters in Islam. First of all, I've just come into this conference, and I just want to note a bit of a disappointment that the entire program features absolutely no women speakers, which seems to suggest that this is only a half global movement of moderates, and I hope doesn't imply that women can never be moderate. Secondly, this session is on social justice, and I'm a little bit disappointed that it's only about money. Surely social justice is much more than that, and I'm really rather pleased that Prof. Agundis mentioned in the end all these principles which suggest a lot more than about banking or the gap between rich and poor. Social justice surely takes in all sorts of inequalities, and that there are so much more other factors which disadvantage people, including many that he perhaps did mention at the end: race, religion, gender, physical ability, etc. So I hope the panel can address some of those issues of social justice as well. Thank you.
Well, we'll get a collection of a few questions, and then we can get the panelists to comment due to time constraint. Yes, I've got one there, and one yourself, say. Yeah. There's one speaker there. One question there at the back.
I think the mic came to me first, so is that all right?
Where am I?
I'm here.
Okay, fine. Yeah.
I did wave a number of times,
sorry,
but
yeah. Maybe
we
the
were
lights
not.
darker. Yeah. We're open. We're open.
It's all right. I mean, maybe not as attractive as that in Marina just now. Okay. My name is Denison Jayasuriya, and I'm from the Institute of Ethnic Studies at Icgmm. I thank the panel for the thoughts, and especially I think inspired by the thought from Japan on how from very individualistic, market-oriented crisis can bring the best in humanity, and also the numerous lessons from Islam. But I think although this is a conference of moderates and moderation is the part, I think there cannot be any moderate position when it comes to greed, injustice, exploitation, and alienation. And this is where our stand has to be for justice and truth. And it's in this context that what we need to look for are actually alternatives, not market capitalism or state socialism, not welfare handouts or neglect and injustice. I think my main question is the panel seeing alternative models emerging at the global level in terms of social economy, social business, solidarity economy, in alternative systems like fair trade, the cooperative movement, which are emerging, which are more people-centered, more profit-focused for sustainability, more planet and environment friendly. And does the panel see the emergence of such a global movement as alternative or parallelly moving, where there have been a lot of initiatives around the world, including the Islamic finance and Sharia compliance? Thank you.
Thank you. I got one more question there inside. At the back.
Yep, good evening. My name is Jordi. I am a alumni. I want to ask Prof. Azmi, since the speakers after Prof. Azmi didn't tackle what Prof. Azmi mentioned at the end, how to implement objective of Sharia in the Sharia financing. So I think it's very important because it's very challenging. Even for Islamic banking, it's still not in line with the Maqasid Sharia. The products are still the replication of the conventional products. Even the products that causes global financial crisis is still there. So please enlighten me on this matter. Thank you.
Said, we'll keep everything all the questions and they all respond together. Yes, Said.
Thank you, Said Akwar here. Just another point, I also regret that there's no speaker from China. China has always put themselves forward as the middle kingdom, Ummatan Wasatan, and also developing in that manner. It will be interesting to listen to them. My question is for Mr. Ian Age and also Mr. Watanabe. Mr. Ian Age, you spoke about job sharing. Can you just give us a bit more specifics on that? And Mr. Watanabe, you mentioned the Japanese corporates helped each other without compensation after the earthquake. Can you just give us a bit examples and what is the Japanese thing behind that? Thank you.
Can I have one last question before we give them time to respond?
Okay, thank you. When we are studying access to justice, it is very clear to us that justice is accessible only by the big guys in any aspect of life. In economic access, in banking system, whether Sharia or conventional system, in social life, in education, etc., justice is only, especially in legal system, justice is only accessible by the big guys. When you are proposing that we must underlining justice based on honesty, humbleness, they are all subjective measures. Could you advise us how to standardize the personal system or standardized system to measure how access to justice can be strengthened, not based on humbleness or honesty, which are never measurable, yeah, but at a standardized measure. Thank you.
All right. Can we get the response in order of our speaking engagement now? Ian, can we start? Ian, everybody will respond and summarize what you question relevant to your questions. Yeah.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you for those interesting questions. I have to say I hadn't realized that there were no women on any of the sessions in the conference, and I have to say I do think that that's very well pointed out. And certainly, just as I indicated that any movement needs to be inclusive of the youth of today, certainly it would need to be inclusive of women. In terms of the inequalities that are mentioned, Of course, the remit of the panel and the session today is specifically not social justice in a wider context, but social justice in the context of money. And therefore, I don't think it was limited of the panel to consider things from that sole point of view. Of course, there are huge inequalities that lead from the problems that we were talking about, and that also give rise to additional ones. The place of women in the global marketplace is clearly an issue that we didn't deal with, but which is of ever-increasing importance. And discrimination by women in the global marketplace is clearly, again, something which perhaps we could have, or I could have mentioned in what I was saying, clearly is something that needs to be dealt with in a conference such as this. It was mentioned, or it was asked about alternatives to the present systems. We concentrated as a panel, I think, or I certainly concentrated upon the market capitalism system. And I think the reason for that is that, at least in terms of where we are at present globally, that is the present majority system. And I don't think that's going to change overnight. Of course, there are alternatives. When I was talking about the need for more corporate governance from the bottom up, I mentioned the need for employees to have a say in corporate governance, and there have been in the UK and elsewhere the development of cooperatives, of worker organised companies. In England, things like the John Lewis Corporation, which is a leading light of this movement in the United Kingdom. But these tend to be small operations, and they don't seem to lead the way forward for, or are likely to lead to dramatic change of the system overnight. Therefore, I think necessarily, if you have a system which is unlikely to change, at least in the short term, then I think you have to live with it and have to make suggestions as to how it may be bettered. But that isn't to deny the importance of alternative systems. In relation to the third question, which was, I think, on the basis of how to implement Sharia, then I'm in the presence of people that know, I'm sure, far better than I. But all I would say is that it needs some form of regulation, just like market capitalism. It can't be a completely unregulated industry. I did a lot of my research in the 1980s in Egypt, at a time when Islamic finance houses were completely unregulated. And there was a lot, as there is in most Islamic countries, a huge undercurrent of interest and support for Islamic finance amongst Muslims. And they expanded rapidly, the Islamic finance houses in Egypt in the 1980s. But they were completely unregulated. And when there was an economic downturn, it was found that they had been doing all sorts of prohibited things. They'd been investing in the international stock market, they'd been speculating in currencies, they'd been doing all sorts of things. And most of them went bust. And a whole system was only brought out of what was really quite a serious situation by being backed up by the Saudis. And the Saudis indeed were people who came very late to the Islamic finance world because they were concerned about the validity of a lot of the processes in relation to Islamic finance. But of course, that has been answered by a number of institutions now, by the AOFI in Bahrain, by the Islamic Fiqh Council in Saudi Arabia, and the various institutions in Malaysia. Malaysia is quite rightly at the vanguard of the Islamic finance movement, and so it should be. I was asked about my rather throwaway line in relation to job sharing. Certainly employment, mass unemployment around the world, and youth unemployment is a really, really serious issue. And I'm not sure that I have any answers or know the answers. It always struck me as a lawyer, a non-economist, that it was odd that you had an economy where people like myself are killing themselves by working, and there are other people that don't have anything to do. And it always struck me that in an ideal world, there would be sufficient employment for everybody to go around. Now that's me speaking idealistically. But it seemed to me that there ought to be some possible way of seeking alternatives whereby job sharing, and I was an academic, a full-time academic, but I suggested that I job shared, and I'm now only a part-time academic, and this works very well. And it seemed to me that there might be the possibility for some sort of job sharing between those at the end of their career, those at the beginning of their career, to bring this youth unemployment down. And lastly, in relation to the standardization or system or access to justice, well, this again goes back to the whole basis of perhaps what we didn't spend a lot of time talking about, which was how do you define greed, how do you define social justice? We looked at the remedies rather than the definitions. But I think that's the nature of a conference like this, that it's people striving to seek a way forward rather than producing definitions.
Okay, Najib?
Okay, thank you. A couple of questions. I think about the idea of expanding looking beyond economic justice. I do agree, but again, from my perspective, coming from economics background, I would rather look from economics justice, because I'm not an expert in other areas. But more importantly, when I look at the issue of, for example, new form of financing and so on, as being mentioned by Denison Jayasuriya, I think the example of people providing financing individually to small groups of people, yes, these are important, but I think if you look from macro perspective, this would not be an alternative to replacing the existing financial system. I think we have to look at what is the alternative to the current global financial system. I think people are asking questions. Of course, coming from an Islamic finance point of view, I would be saying, yes, Islam has a solution to this. And if we can look at the proposal, the value proposal provided by Islamic finance, obviously, this is one alternative to replace the current global financial crisis. Notwithstanding that, there are many issues within the Islamic financial system. For example, to give you one simple example, we always talk about halal, Sharia compliance. To me, it's not enough. A product can be halal, but it's not beneficial to society. An example, we could have a company that's halal, status halal, Sharia compliant, but if the company destroys environment, destroys many other things, then it's not tayyibah. So to me, one of the key important things is a company or a product or services must not be only halal, but also must be tayyibah. And this is the concept that what we want to promote now. We have to go beyond halal. Because again, the issue of the critics of Islamic banking, I'm one of the critics in a sense, although I'm part of it, I'm also a critic. In a sense, if you look at, many people are questioning the validity of Islamic banking. How Islamic is Islamic banking, for example, that's one question. People see that there's not much difference between Islamic banking and conventional banking. It's just a matter of replacing interest, for example. So is this the value proposition of Islamic banking? So these are the things that we need to look at, re-evaluate, criticize ourselves, and put a value proposal. One of the solutions, which was mentioned earlier on by the president of IDB and also partly mentioned by Negara Malaysia, is about promoting the equity participation in financing, whereby you have equitable financing, promotion of justice in financing. rather than one party wins at the end of every financing transaction. So this is one way that we can say that yes, Islam promotes justice through maqasid al-Sharia. The focus on justice, the focus on equity financing promotes the well-being of both the financier and the end user of the financier. I mean, those are some of the things that we can think about and propose. But again, the idea of using maqasid, to me, I'm a proponent of maqasid al-Sharia, using the objective of Sharia as a basis of economic development, as a basis of Islamic bank financing. But again, it is not fully developed yet. That's something that Muslim economists and many other people should be working to come up with certain index, maqasid index, in order to evaluate any economic activities. It must be consistent with Sharia, and something that can be measured, that can be evaluated, and that can meet, again, at the end of the day, the requirements of Sharia. I think that is the crux of it. And I think that's my comment.
Okay, Tanabe-san.
I'd like to touch on a few points. Firstly, Japan society is, as it said, the middle class society, which are supported by so many small medium enterprise, which are very strong in global arena. So the supporting small medium enterprise by way of so-called microfinance and institutional finance by a Japanese system, and especially among companies, there is a so-called suppliers credit chain that is huge, and without even the bank support, they can support each other. And as to women, I think in the fields of APEC, there is a big movement of women's empowerment, and together with youth, young entrepreneurs empowerment. That may be still weak, but leaders are very much trying hard to make women's and youth empowerment. And about mutual or assistance each other, in case of banks, if we face a huge disaster, we have a tradition of a record of history that to share even the office with competitor banks. And in case of manufacturers, I think they are sharing the manufacturing plant, even with competitors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Agundus.
Hello? Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I would like to say some things. First of all, this panel is not a model. I think this panel may be to try opening door to a new solution via Islamic rules or other common values and norms for human beings. Secondly, unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know exactly, everybody is complaining from capitalism. But Islamic rules may be solution with, that is very important, there are some conditions for that. If we present Islamic rules in a good way and with our practice. As you know, لسان الحال أقوى تأثيرا من لسان القول. The good deeds and practice are better and more effective than the words. That is very important. And we have done in the past, in history of Islam. Please, I would like to remind you, period of Umar bin Abdul Aziz. One day, he couldn't find a poor to give him or her, that is interesting, zakat amwal, alms giving, money, etc. And in first 150 years from period of Ottoman state, there was in Istanbul 170 sadaqah stones. Could you imagine that one rich man or woman is putting his sadaqah inside a stone, and in this stone, gold or others or other money remain for a long time. Nobody can pick up completely these issues. That is very important. We have done in history of Islamic society. And last thing, that is another problem. Ladies and gentlemen, I am listening to speakers from the morning like you, but we should separate between a religion and its followers. Because Quran says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, who have believed, but they have done good deeds. That is important. Then anybody can be a Muslim, but his or her features may be not Muslims or not goods is better. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gunduz. I think we've run out of time, and we'd like to thank all the panelists for their contribution in the normal manner. Give it a big clap. And thank you, organizers. I will leave it to the organizers to carry on.
Ladies and gentlemen, another round of applause to all four speakers, distinguished speakers, and our moderator in the third session. And my special congratulations to Datuk Dr. Nik Nozusani for abiding within the 75 minutes precisely. Thank you very much once again. And now we're going to take a 10 minutes break. Refreshment is provided right outside the hall. We shall resume at within 10 minutes time. Thank you.